Isaac. We are supposed to, Chaplain Ray Kauffman, ex-Chaplain Ray Kauffman, is going to be presenting next. Chaplain Kauffman was the original paid chaplain at Franklin County. Prior to that, it was funded here and there, and to this day, that same program of funded chaplain is working in Franklin County. He had was in the Air Force, completed a tour in the Air Force 4 years, and was working in various industrial facilities here in the county. And then this is all from memory too. I'm working on this really hard. And then got the call, and the Lord called him to serve in chaplaincy, and went to Shippensburg and then to the Lutheran Seminary. Oh man, I'm getting good at this. So I'm telling you. So anyway, and so he was a chaplain for quite a few years at Franklin County, and then he started a migrants ministry, which is another tough. That's a tough community, I can tell you. But it's so needed in this community. Chambersburg, because of the farming and the tree crops, apples, peaches, things like that, there are a lot of migrants here. And a lot of Hispanic migrants. And so the need was there, and he answered that, and it was a wonderful thing. But in 2013, he wrote a book, Breaking Out of Your Prison, and they're on sale at the table in the back. I've read it. Roy got me a copy of it, and I thank him for that. And it's an easy read, but it's so, the information there is so practical, and one of those things you read and say, well, see, I could have thought of that, but you didn't, and he did, because he pays attention. And he really did pay attention, and it's really a good thing. So I give you Chaplain Ray Kauffman.
Good afternoon. This is. Are you turned on? No, I'm not turned on yet. Okay. Before you turn?
Before you turn.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mike, and good afternoon, everyone. And I can identify with a lot of all of you who have spoken and what you've said. I think I've been there, done that, or experienced it in some way or another and in the prison chaplaincy. Appreciate Chaplain Ike here sharing with us, and he was one of my successors and doing a great job, because it takes a great job. Now, I know it's the middle of the afternoon, and I know how easy it is to doze off. So I know I got a good job to keep me awake. One of my most embarrassing moments, I think, was before I entered the ministry, I was at church one Sunday with my family, 2 small girls. And I know this is something nobody in this room done, okay? But I dozed off occasionally on Sunday morning. And you know, what the wife does, you know? And so this Sunday, she didn't catch it in time. I dozed off. You don't have any hardwood floor in here. Well, I dozed off, and we have a hardwood floors in our church. And I woke up in the middle of the sermon, and I went like that on the hardwood floor, right in the middle of the sermon. And so I just looked around. I just looked forward. I didn't look around or anything. I didn't want anybody to know who it was. But the first words I heard out of the pastor's mouth when I woke up was, "It's time we wake up and realize." So if you hear me going like this, it's because I'm going to see somebody sleeping. Anyhow, for the benefit of you who might be listening to this on tape or otherwise, I'm Reverend Ray Kauffman, past chaplain of the Franklin County Prison in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. And I'm making this presentation to the South Central region of the Yoke Fellow Prison Ministry of Pennsylvania, volunteers and others. And it's a joy to be with you today. This is very familiar territory for me. It might not be for you, but my first church before I went into prison, I say that sort of a tongue-in-cheek, was right down the road here, St. John's United Methodist Church, and there's United Brethren Church, and then this church, Pleasant View Mennonite. And for the 7 years that I was a pastor there, we did our Bible schools together and shared, and we'd have it at one church one summer and one the next summer. So I'm very familiar with this. I want to talk to you, first of all, why did I write a book? Everybody's writing books, I know. And before I wrote this book, I gave it quite a bit of thought and prayer. And I had a great producer that helped me a lot to organize things and that sort of thing. But I know I can identify with some of the stories that were told here today. In fact, I've gotten letters from prisoners who have read the book and how much it had helped to them. Before I wrote the book, I reviewed what has been written about prison ministry. A lot of good books out there for prison ministry. And one of them, of course, Chuck Colson wrote many books, as you know. Most of you are familiar with him, I'm sure. And they're all good books. But I was looking for something that could identify with the prisoner and the family and those like you who minister to them. And I thank God for the volunteers, and I know I'm grateful for that. But appreciate what all you're doing. You're doing a valuable ministry, let me tell you. And so I read these books, and I thought, these are a lot of good ideas in here. And they're good, but they're more about programs and that sort of thing that we're talking to a different group of people. But I wanted to write something that spoke directly to the prisoner and their family and some of the issues that they went through. And so I got this idea. Mike, do you have the list, or Roy, do you have it? Yeah. Do you want to hand them out right now? Mike's going to hand them out. I think there's enough to go around. I got one.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
They're out.
Oh, they're out. Oh, okay. You're ahead of me. Okay, very good. Okay, so I made this list up out of the list of the book that we talk about, because most are targeted at audiences that are ministering to them, such as you. But I wanted to relate the topics of the prisoner and what they experienced from the time they went in prison. And I just want you to look over this for a moment. And it lists the emotions that are covered in this book. And I just want to read them quickly. And what it does, if you're in prison ministry or you yourself want to do it for yourself or someone else, then these are things to check. And I just want, if you were willing to do a test for me. As you look over these emotions, and I'm just going to read them out, I want you to read down over these, and the list is, if you've experienced this emotion in the last month, the last year, or in your lifetime, if you have experienced it, don't raise your hand. If you look down over this list and you don't find one that you experienced, fine. But how many of you have not experienced anxiety, denial, authority, anger, loneliness, bargaining with God, fear, depression, reality, acceptance, temptation, and the future? Or is there anybody has never experienced any of that? I'd be surprised if I had any hands. We've all had them, haven't we? We've all experienced at least one or probably all of them at one time or another in our life. And that's exactly what it is, because these are the emotions that prisons experience when they come in prison. And I'm no psychologist or psychiatrist, but these are emotions that we all experienced. And I've had doctors, I've had insurance salesmen, businessmen, school counselors read this book. And they said, man, that's just what we experience that all day long with clients or our classes or our students or what have you. And so, I wanted to write it a small book. I know I didn't want to write a book that had 400 pages to it and expect a prisoner to read it, right? It turns me off when I get one that big, although I'm reading one right now, David Jeremiah, on the Book of Signs, and that's a big book and a deep book. But I wanted to keep it simple and write it in a language that they would understand, using the vocabulary they would understand. So that's the emotions that we experience, and this book handles it all. I'm not going through all the book, but I just want to hit some highlights. But before I do any more, I want to tell you a little bit about me, because whenever I read a book, I want to know who the author is. I want to know a little bit about them and what they've experienced. And I've experienced all these, just as most of you have. First of all, my wife and I were childhood sweethearts, high school. We married a year out of school. As Mike relayed to this a little bit, I searched around for a couple years to try to find what God wanted me to do. And it was the time the draft was still in, and I was getting about 2 weeks away from being drafted. And I said, well, if I'm going to have to go in the military, I'm going to pick my own. So I picked the Air Force for 4 years. We'd been married about 3 years at that time. And so I had to go off to training, and then I went to Cape Romanzoff, Alaska, to a remote radar site. During the Cold War, we could watch on our radar, we could watch the Russian jets coming over this way into Alaska, and we'd send a Strategic Air Command out, and they would go like that, intercept them and go back. Reminds me, Russia was in the news then as they are today. But during that time, we was on a remote site, all males, no females at that time. We lived, worked, slept, and ate under one roof, because, and the nearest village was 17 miles away with 17 Eskimos. And the only way you could get there was by bobsled or skiing. And so we didn't have much social life. And the chaplain who was assigned there at that time by the Air Force had several sites that he had to cover every month, supposedly. But every time he was scheduled to come into our site, he was snowed out, couldn't get in. So I was there from October to almost Easter of the next year, and we had no services. So a couple of us airmen got together that was raised in the church and was missing the church fellowship. Said, well, we ought to talk to the commanding officer and see if he'd permit us to use the theater to do an Easter service in 1958. I was there when Alaska became a state. And he was very cordial. He said, absolutely. He said, you do what you want. So some of us would do a little study of some sort, Bible study. Some would pray, some would sing, but didn't have to worry about me singing. I remember when I first went into the ministry, about the second Sunday on our way home from church, she said, Ray, when we sing, she said, would you step back away from the microphone a little bit? I said, I got your message, honey. So we did that. But anyhow, so during that time, we continued the services then every Sunday until I left the next October. And during that time, I began to get this itch of entering the ministry. And so we didn't have cell phones then, and the only way to keep in touch was by letter, and that took about 2 weeks for the airmail to get through from one place to the other. So I remember the one letter I wrote to my wife was, she was alone here in Chambersburg, and this is my home area, and I said, honey, I think when I get out of the military, I might want to pursue the ministry. Well, I got a reply back in about 2 weeks, and it wasn't real positive. She had big letters, over my dead body. But I just have you know, she's been a great helpmeet and could be here today, but she's having some health issues. We just celebrated our 68th wedding anniversary a couple of weeks ago. And praise God, we're both still living. Okay. So anyhow, that's a little bit. So anyhow, I got out of the service, and I started working in various industries, and the Lord was still working on me to this. And I was very involved in a local church before I went into the service, and my wife and I, after we married, were. And so the last job I had was the Postal Service. And that, I was there 6.5 years before I went into the ministry. And I liked it. Good job. And I don't know how it works now. I think it's pretty much the same. Any of you here in the Postal Service? This was the late 60s, early 70s. And when you go to the post office then, you went in as a temporary, and you filled positions that were open, somebody's sick, somebody in vacation. You always got your 40 hours, but you didn't have any particular job or route. And you had to wait till an opening came. So on a Friday night, I turned my notice in June of 72. No, it was before that, about May or June, 72. On a Friday evening, that I was going to resign to go into the ministry. My supervisor came to me on Monday morning and said, Ray, I got some news for you. He said, you know, you're next to be made permanent. And he said, you're next in line. And I looked at him and I said, you wouldn't do this to me. I said, you know, I just give you my resignation to go into ministry. I know, but I have to tell you. I said, okay, thanks. Can you give me the night to think about it and pray about it with my wife? Yeah. So we did, and we both decided there was no turning back. I said, this devil's not going to stop me. So I said, we're going to go through with it, and we did. And I'll have you know, at that time, I was married, had 2 children, had a mortgage, and I was leaving a secure job, and people thought I was nuts, and go into the ministry. I had to go back to college in my mid-30s. I was going to school with kids that could have been my sons or daughters, and had appointed to a church down the road here, about 200 people, and a full load of college. You think I was busy? I look back now and I say, how did I ever do it? Only with prayer and a very supportive family. I give them credit. It wasn't easy. During my senior year in college, a friend of mine who was working for the county at that time, and we had to do an internship at a local program. And she had youth work, drug and alcohol, different things. And I said to her, it was a lady who was in charge of it, but I graduated with. And I said, but Jenny, do you have anything about prison ministry? I have an inkling that I'd like to do a internship maybe at the prison if they'd have it. I don't know, but I'll check. A couple weeks later, she come back and she said, Ray, I think things are okay. I checked with the county commissioners, I checked with the warden, and said, as long as you can have a professor come and follow you through, do your mentoring for you, and you write a paper at the end, we'll prove it. So we did. And the rest is history. And Ike's a result of that. And then I was the first full-time chaplain held after I got out of seminary. And many people thought whenever I left the church ministry that I was leaving the ministry. I said, I don't think so. I said, I think that's where ministry really happens. And I tell you, you're doing a great job. All the volunteers that go in, I commend you for your efforts. And I always told our volunteers, if you can't take disappointment, you don't want this job. You don't want to volunteer. Because if you're in it long enough, you're going to be disappointed with somebody or something that happens. And So we all go through some of these avenues. So that's a little bit about myself. And then I was out a few years doing some migrant work, but I always had this writing something that would be helpful to the prisoner. And so I ran across a friend that was into publishing, and he was asking me about this. And so we sat, talked, and prayed for a while about it. And so this is the book, Breaking Out of Your Prison. The reason it's called Breaking Out of Your Prison, it's not a brick and mortar prison, but it's a prison that we sometimes keep ourselves in because of our emotions, our anxiety and anxiousness. I looked in a dictionary. Do you know that anxiety and anxious follows one another in the dictionary? And they both mean pretty much the same thing. It's fear and worry, or mental anxiety. And we all go through that, don't we, at one time or another. The person coming into prison is very anxious, very filled with anxiety when he goes in. And what's happened to the first thing after that is denial. I can't believe this happened. Anxious. Anger happens to be in there. But denial happens. I know one of the experiences I had when I was in the prison ministry, I have a couple brothers, a couple of them, just me and my younger brother are still living. But my one brother died just a couple years ago, and his wife had a son, would be my nephew, that worked for the phone company. And in 1986 is when I was in the ministry. And I got a call one day from a friend of mine who was his boss at the phone company that my nephew was killed straight out by a drunken driver. And they asked me and my wife if we would go help break the news to my brother and his wife. And let me tell you, that's not an easy thing to do, as some of you have experienced. And so it was a time that I was in denial. I couldn't believe it would happen. And then being anxious or being angry. The year, my daughter, my oldest daughter and I graduated the same year. I graduated from seminary and she graduated from high school the same year. And that summer, she was friends with a girl that lived down in Cumberland County, but they were friends in school. And on a very warm afternoon, we got a message that her girlfriend was about her age. She really liked her brother better. But her girlfriend was murdered in her own living room on a Sunday afternoon by her boyfriend. And that's hard for an 18-year-old gal to take and say, Daddy, why? Why did this happen? How do you answer them? And I said, Michelle, that's only something God can answer. But I said, the other thing that I have to deal with, I have to go into prison tomorrow morning and I have to talk to that individual. And I have to say, God's grace is available. God can forgive you. Do you think that was easy? No, not at all. But that's how big God's grace is. And we talked. And I sort of lost track of the individual. I don't know how much time he got even at this point. But things happen to us that shake us to the core sometimes. And then you talk about fear. Fear. When I went into the prison ministry after working for the post office and having a family and 2 young daughters and a mortgage, I had fear. I had faith, but I also had fear at the same time. Faith and fear at the same time. But again, that was a fear that I had. Whether I would succeed, whether I could be a good parent, a good father, a good husband, and with the responsibilities of the church. So when I read this book, and others have read it, and they said, oh, my Ray said, one counselor told me, said, that's what I'm experiencing with my kids, even in school. And after listening to some of you here today, I think many of you can identify with that. And so this isn't a book just for a one-time read. It's a group book. It can be studied. It can be in a church study. I did it in my home church the year I wrote it, and had about 8 or 10 in a group, and makes a good group study, whether at church or in the community or in prison. And I think, Ike, you have used it some, haven't you? Yeah. And so it's more like a reference book. And sometimes I have to go back to this and preach to myself. And so I hope you enjoy it, and I do have a special price on it today. $8 for one, they normally $10, $8 for one, 2 for $15. And I just hope that if you do purchase one, that you're able to use it and it's helpful to you and those you minister to. I want to just share a few statistics. You know, you help people not only spiritually, but you know you can help them financially. Do you know, as I was looking up some prison statistics, that I asked one Sunday in church, how many people is affected by you being here? And I said, just raise one finger for every person that's affected by you being in prison. And the average was 7. 7 people are affected by every person that's in prison. Now they say there's approximately, and this varies, I know you'll get different figures. The national population is about 2 million, but that does not figure local prisons, I don't believe. And so there's probably another 1 million in local prisons. So if you take a country population of 350 million in the United States, and there's 7 people affected for every one in person, you can do the multiplication, the math. So a lot of people are affected by each one that's in prison. And our local county, I don't know where it is in the counties where you're from, but in Franklin County, talking to the prisoners, or to the commissioners years ago, one told me, he said, you know, Ray, our prison budget, our Franklin County tax base, 75% of our tax base goes to the criminal justice system. For guards, for the prison, for operating, for probation, parole, the attorneys, what have you. So that's a lot of money. 75%, 3/4 of our tax money goes for the criminal justice system. So you're saving the taxpayer money if we can keep one person out of prison. I heard a lady a couple years ago say that it was running something similar to what Bernadette's doing, I think. And she said it takes 7 tries before you send them to drug and alcohol or rehab. It takes 7 tries before they actually overcome and make it a success. So it's a big need. There's a big need out there. So that was just a few figures, and we could go on and on. But I think you know the system and what it's doing. Anyhow, so the old adage is that you and I will be the same 1 year from now with 2 exceptions. The people we befriend or the people we run around with, hang out with, and what we read or the visuals. And now you got to add social media and what you put into the mind. You know, I was reading a book the other day, and then I was reading a news magazine. And then I put down Jeremiah's book for a while, Book of Signs. And after I read that news magazine, I said, I'm going back to the Book of Signs. You know, I've asked this question many times. If you didn't listen to the news or read the newspaper or magazines or TV or whatever, if you didn't listen to the news, would you have a more positive or negative outlook on our country? Absolutely, no question about it. Just ask yourself that. And yet, we're bombarded with news media every time and phone calls and what have you. We're fighting a battle. We're trying to bring light into the darkness. All of us are. And it's a challenge. But I think more and more, as Hebrews says, as we see that day approaching, we're going to have to be the light and the salt And it's not easy. It's not easy. But I pray that you have a good experience and that God will lead you. Elton Trueblood had it right. We are yoked together. And you know, I came from a farm, so I know what a yoke is, where you yoke two horses together. You help pull the load one with another. And that's what we do. We help pull the load with one another. We're not in this alone. We're yoked together with Christ. And I just pray blessings upon you and everyone that you minister to, that you will be a blessing to those in need. And whatever, someone said, be kind to everyone you meet today, because everyone you face is dealing with some kind of a problem or a challenge in their life. We're all in different stages, but we all have issues, don't we? May we be a light and a salt to those around us. God bless you all. Have a good trip home. And I don't know if you want to take any questions, but I'm